The mining colony of Kepler 442b had seen better days. Its red dwarf sun cast everything in a perpetual orange twilight, and the air recyclers wheezed like dying animals. Marcus Chen was born in the medical bay during the worst storm the planet had ever recorded, when lightning the color of molten copper split the sky and the ground shook with something that wasn't quite thunder. His mother died giving birth to him. His father, a deep-core miner named David Chen, never spoke of that night except to say that the storm stopped the moment Marcus drew his first breath. The other colonists thought it was coincidence. David wasn't so sure. Marcus grew up different from the other children. While they played with holographic toys and virtual reality games, he spent his time in the old archives, reading about Earth's mythologies and ancient civilizations. The colony's AI teacher, Aria, found his interests unusual but encouraged them. She noticed things about Marcus that others missed. How electronic devices worked better when he was near them. How the colony's aging power grid seemed to stabilize during his visits to the main reactor chamber. When Marcus turned 12, the dragons came. They appeared without warning on a Tuesday morning, their massive forms blocking out the weak sun. The colonists had never seen anything like them. These weren't the small flying reptiles from Earth's fossil records. These were creatures of legend made flesh, beings the size of spacecraft, with scales that shifted between colors like liquid metal and eyes that burned with ancient intelligence. The dragons landed around the colony's perimeter, creating a perfect circle. They didn't attack. They didn't move. They simply waited, their great heads turned toward the settlement as if searching for something. Colony Administrator Walsh activated the emergency protocols. Defense turrets rose from hidden positions, charged and ready to fire. The colonists huddled in their homes, watching the feeds from security cameras as these impossible creatures maintained their vigil. "What do they want?" Walsh demanded, pacing the control room. The colony's xenobiologist, Dr. Sarah Kim, studied the readings from her instruments with growing amazement. "I don't know," she admitted. "But look at these scans. Their biology is impossible. They're not carbon-based life forms as we understand them. The readings suggest they're constructed from some kind of programmable matter. But the energy signatures are off the charts. It's like they're made of crystallized starlight." For 3 days, the dragons waited. The colony remained in lockdown, supplies running low, nerves fraying. Some colonists wanted to attack. Others suggested attempting communication, but every time someone approached the perimeter, the dragons would shift slightly, a movement that somehow conveyed both patience and warning. On the 4th day, Marcus made his decision. He slipped out of his father's quarters while David was sleeping off a double shift. The boy moved through the colony's maintenance tunnels, paths he'd explored countless times during his solitary wanderings. He emerged at the main gate, the same gate his father had helped install when the colony was first established. The nearest dragon was magnificent and terrifying. Its head alone was larger than most of the colony's buildings, and its eyes held depths that seemed to contain galaxies. When Marcus stepped into the open, those ancient eyes fixed on him immediately. The dragon lowered its massive head until it was level with the 12-year-old boy. Marcus felt no fear, only a strange sense of recognition, as if he was meeting an old friend after a long absence. "Hello," Marcus said simply. The dragon's response wasn't words, but something deeper. Images flooded Marcus's mind, visions of vast civilizations among the stars, of wars fought across dimensions, of dragons serving as guardians and warriors for beings of incredible power. He saw worlds where reality bent to the will of those who understood its true nature, where the line between science and magic blurred beyond recognition. And through it all, he saw humans. Not as they were now, scattered across a few dozen colonies, struggling to survive in an indifferent universe, but as they had once been, and could be again, beings capable of commanding the very forces of creation, leaders among species that spanned galaxies. The vision ended, and Marcus found himself changed. Knowledge flowed through his young mind, knowledge of forces and principles that human science had barely begun to glimpse. He understood now why the dragons had come, why they had waited. They were searching for something that had been lost, something that could only be awakened in certain bloodlines under specific conditions. They were searching for a true human. "I understand," Marcus whispered. The dragon's eyes flickered with something that might have been approval. Around the colony perimeter, the other dragons began to move, but not to attack. They rose into the air with impossible grace, their forms shifting and shimmering as they prepared to depart. The lead dragon remained a moment longer, its gaze holding Marcus's. Another wave of images passed between them, this time showing Marcus glimpses of his future. He saw himself grown tall and strong, standing before assemblies of alien races who hung on his every word. He saw fleets of starships bending to his will, and dragons, thousands of them, following his commands across the void between stars. But he also saw the price: the loneliness of being unique among his own kind, the weight of responsibility for powers that could reshape worlds, the knowledge that he would forever walk between what humanity was and what it could become. "I accept," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was accepting. The dragon's massive head nodded once, a gesture so human it was almost amusing coming from such an alien creature. Then it too rose into the air, its form dissolving into points of light that scattered across the orange sky like falling stars. Marcus stood alone outside the colony gates, watching until the last traces of light disappeared. When he turned back toward home, he found his father waiting for him, along with half the colony's population. They had watched everything through the security feeds. David Chen approached his son slowly, studying the boy's face for changes. What he saw there made him take a step back. Marcus still looked 12 years old, but his eyes held depths that hadn't been there before. There was an awareness in them, a weight of knowledge that no child should carry. "What did they want?" David asked quietly. Marcus considered the question. How could he explain what had passed between him and the dragon? How could he describe the visions of humanity's forgotten glory, or the responsibility that now rested on his young shoulders? "They were looking for someone," Marcus said finally. "They found me." Dr. Kim stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her caution. "What did they show you?" "The readings we got during your interaction were incredible. It was like they were downloading information directly into your brain." Marcus nodded. "They were. They showed me what we used to be, what we can be again." He looked around at the colonists, these hardy souls who had traveled light years to scratch out a living on a hostile world. "We're not just survivors, struggling to get by on the edge of space. We're the descendants of star shapers, of beings who commanded forces that could move planets." Administrator Walsh laughed nervously. "Come on, son. You're talking about fantasy, not reality." "Am I?" Marcus raised his hand, and the colony's failing lights suddenly blazed with renewed power. The air recyclers stopped their labored wheezing and began to hum with smooth efficiency. Throughout the settlement, machines that had been struggling for months suddenly operated like new. The colonists stared in shocked silence. Dr. Kim's instruments went wild, detecting energy flows that defied explanation. "How?" she whispered. Marcus looked at his hand, watching energy patterns that were invisible to everyone else dance across his skin. "The dragons aren't just alien creatures. They're tools, created by an ancient civilization that understood the true nature of reality. They respond to those who carry the right genetic markers, the right mental patterns, the markers that mark someone as truly human." "But we're all human," David protested. Marcus shook his head sadly. We call ourselves human, but we've forgotten what that really means. Humanity spread across the galaxy once, long before Earth's recorded history. We ruled an empire that spanned thousands of worlds, commanding powers that made us seem like gods to lesser races. But we fell, scattered, reduced to what we are now. He gestured to the improved colony around them. This is just the beginning. The dragons are waiting out there, sleeping in hidden places between the stars. They're waiting for humans to remember who we really are, to reclaim our birthright. The colonists looked at each other uncertainly. What Marcus was describing sounded like the ravings of a child's imagination, but the evidence was all around them. Their dying colony had been restored to full function with a gesture from a 12-year-old boy. Over the following weeks, word of the incident spread throughout human space. Scientists, government officials, and curiosity seekers descended on the remote mining colony. They ran tests on Marcus, studied the colony's mysteriously improved systems, and analyzed every second of security footage from the dragon's visit. Most concluded that it was an elaborate hoax, despite evidence to the contrary. The few who believed faced a more disturbing question. If Marcus was telling the truth, what did it mean for humanity's future? Were they ready for the responsibility that came with cosmic-level power? Marcus endured their questions and tests with patience beyond his years. He answered what he could and remained silent about things they weren't ready to understand. But at night, when the colony settled into sleep, he would stand outside and look up at the star-filled sky. He could sense them out there, the sleeping dragons, waiting in the cold between stars. They were patient, as they had been patient for millennia. They would wait until he was ready, until he had grown into the role they expected him to fill. And sometimes, on the clearest nights, Marcus thought he could hear them calling his name. The boy who had been born during a storm that defied explanation was no longer just Marcus Chen, son of a deep-core miner. He was something new, something that bridged the gap between humanity's humble present and its magnificent past. He was the first step toward reclaiming a heritage that most humans had forgotten ever existed. But being the bridge between two worlds meant belonging fully to neither. As Marcus grew and learned to control his expanding abilities, he began to understand the profound isolation that awaited him. He would be forever unique among his own kind, forever changed by contact with forces beyond their comprehension. Yet there was also hope. The dragons had shown him glimpses of other worlds, other colonies where children were beginning to exhibit similar abilities. He wasn't alone, not entirely. Scattered across human space, others like him were awakening to their true nature. The age of humanity's return was beginning, and Marcus Chen was its herald. The child born in a storm was destined to become the storm himself, a force that would reshape the galaxy and remind the universe why humanity had once been feared and revered among the stars. As his 13th birthday approached, Marcus felt the pull growing stronger. The dragons were calling, and soon he would have to answer. His childhood on Kepler 442b was ending, and his true education was about to begin. The mining colony that had seen better days was about to witness the departure of the most important human born in 1,000 years. And across the galaxy, ancient powers were stirring, sensing that the balance was about to shift once again. The child who spoke with dragons was ready to take his first real step toward becoming the myth he was destined to become. 7 years had passed since the dragons first came to Kepler 442b. Marcus Chen, now 19, stood on the observation deck of the research vessel Prometheus, watching the binary stars of the Centauri system paint space in shades of gold and amber. He was no longer the small boy who had stepped outside colony walls to meet impossible creatures. He had grown tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that held depths of knowledge no human education could provide. The ship around him was a marvel of human engineering. but Marcus knew its true secret. Hidden throughout its structure were dragon-forged components, materials that existed in a state between energy and matter. They responded to his will, making the Prometheus faster and more capable than any vessel in the human fleet. To the crew, he was simply their unusual passenger, a young man with an uncanny ability to fix problems and optimize systems. They had no idea they were traveling with someone who was slowly reshaping their understanding of what was possible. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the expedition's lead xenobiologist, found Marcus in the observation lounge. She had been studying him for 3 years now, ever since the Colonial Authority had assigned her to investigate the Kepler 442b incident. What she had discovered had challenged everything she thought she knew about human evolution and galactic history. "We're approaching the coordinates you gave us," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "But I still don't understand how you know there's something out there." "Long-range sensors show nothing but empty space." Marcus smiled, an expression that held mysteries Elena was only beginning to glimpse. "The dragons aren't bound by the same physical laws that govern normal matter. They exist partially outside our dimensional framework. Your sensors can't detect them because they're not entirely here." Over the past 7 years, Marcus had shared fragments of what the dragons had shown him. Ancient human civilizations that had spanned galaxies. Technologies that merged consciousness with cosmic forces. Wars fought across dimensions that most humans couldn't even perceive. Each revelation had sent shockwaves through the scientific community, but Marcus was careful never to reveal too much at once. Humanity needed time to adjust to these truths. "There," Marcus said suddenly, pointing toward what appeared to be empty space. "Can you see them now?" Elena looked where he indicated and gasped. Space itself seemed to ripple, and suddenly massive forms were visible where nothing had been moments before. Dragons, hundreds of them, arranged in perfect formations that stretched for millions of kilometers. They hung motionless in the void, their crystalline forms catching and reflecting the light of distant stars. "My God," Elena whispered, "how many are there?" "This is just one nest," Marcus replied. "There are thousands of others throughout the galaxy, waiting for the call to awakening." He stood and moved toward the window, pressing his palm against the transparent aluminum. "They've been here since before Earth's first civilizations. Guardians of knowledge that was lost when the old empire fell." The ship's captain, Maria Santos, arrived on the observation deck, her face pale with shock. "Sir, our instruments just detected the largest energy signature in recorded history. Whatever's out there, it's generating power levels equivalent to a small star." Marcus nodded. "They're waking up. They sense my presence." He turned to address both women. "What you're about to witness has been hidden from humanity for over 50,000 years. The dragons aren't just alien creatures. They're the guardians of our true heritage." As if responding to his words, the nearest dragon began to move toward the Prometheus. It was massive beyond comprehension, easily the size of a city, but it moved with fluid grace through space. As it approached, patterns of light began to play across its crystalline scales, creating displays of such beauty that both women found themselves transfixed. "It's trying to communicate," Elena breathed, watching her instruments record energy patterns unlike anything in the scientific literature. "Not trying," Marcus corrected. "It is communicating, just not in a way your technology can interpret." He closed his eyes and extended his consciousness toward the approaching dragon, feeling the familiar rush of connection as their minds touched across the void. Images flooded his awareness, but these were different from his first contact 7 years ago. The dragon was showing him specific locations throughout the galaxy, star systems where others like him were beginning to manifest their abilities. On a mining station orbiting Wolf 359, a young woman had recently discovered she could manipulate gravitational fields. On the agricultural world of New Eden, a teenage boy was unconsciously accelerating plant growth across entire continents. "We're not alone anymore," Marcus murmured, opening his eyes. "The awakening is accelerating." Elena leaned forward eagerly. "What did it show you?" Before Marcus could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Captain Santos activated her comm unit. "Bridge! Report!" "Captain, we're detecting multiple warp signatures approaching our position," came the tense reply from the bridge. 15 ships, configuration unknown. They'll be here in 3 minutes." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. He reached out with his enhanced senses, probing the approaching vessels. What he felt made his blood run cold. "Those aren't human ships," he said grimly. "Get us away from here. Now." But it was too late. The newcomers dropped out of warp space in perfect formation around the Prometheus, their sleek black hulls absorbing light like cosmic shadows. They were beautiful and terrifying, constructed with technology that made human engineering look primitive by comparison. "The Kythera," Marcus whispered, recognizing them from the visions the dragons had shared. "I didn't think they were still active." Elena stared at the alien vessels surrounding them. "Who are the Kythera?" "An ancient race that served the old human empire," Marcus explained, his mind racing through possible responses. "When humanity fell, they went into hiding, waiting for our return. They've been watching, testing, determining if we were worthy of reclaiming our heritage." A communication beam pierced the Prometheus's shields, carrying a voice that spoke in perfect human English, though it had harmonics that suggested the speaker was anything but human. "Heir of the Star Shapers," the voice said, melodious and cold. "We have observed your awakening with interest. You will come aboard our vessel. We have much to discuss." Captain Santos looked at Marcus desperately. "Sir, we can't fight ships like these. Our weapons wouldn't even scratch their hulls." Marcus nodded grimly. He had known this moment would come eventually. The dragons had shown him fragments of what lay ahead, tests that would determine if humanity was ready to reclaim its cosmic inheritance. The Kythera were part of that testing process, ancient servants who had become judges. "I'll go," he said simply. "Keep the ship here and maintain distance from the dragons. Don't try to interfere, no matter what happens." "Marcus, no," Elena protested. "We don't know what they want or what they're capable of." "I do," Marcus replied. "The dragons showed me. The Kythera served humanity for millennia before the fall. They're not evil, but they are thorough. They need to determine if I'm worthy of the power I've inherited." Within minutes, Marcus found himself aboard the lead Kythera vessel, standing in a chamber that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The walls shifted between solid matter and pure energy, displaying star charts and data streams that tracked the movements of civilizations across the galaxy. The Kythera themselves were beings of ethereal beauty, tall and slender with skin that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. Their leader stepped forward, studying Marcus with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of eons. "You are young," the Kythera said, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Marcus's bones. "Younger than any who has awakened to such power in recorded history. This is concerning." "Youth doesn't mean incompetence," Marcus replied, meeting the alien's gaze steadily. "The dragons chose to reveal themselves to me. That has to count for something." The Kythera nodded slowly. "Indeed. The great guardians do not make such choices lightly. But awakening and mastery are different things entirely. You have touched the edges of your true potential, but you have not been tested." The chamber around them shifted, and suddenly Marcus found himself standing on a vast plain under alien stars. In the distance, he could see cities that defied physics, their spires reaching toward orbital rings that glowed with captured sunlight. This was one of humanity's lost worlds, he realized, from the time when they had ruled among the stars. "This is Arcadia Prime," the Cathara explained, its form materializing beside him. "The crown jewel of the Third Human Empire. Observe." The scene before them came alive with holographic figures, humans, but not quite as Marcus knew them. These were taller, more graceful, with an aura of power that made the air around them shimmer. They moved through their crystalline city with confident purpose, directing forces that could reshape matter at the atomic level. "Your ancestors," the Cathara continued. "At the height of their power, they commanded fleets of dragons, reshaped entire star systems, and created technologies that bent the laws of physics to their will. They were magnificent." The scene shifted, showing the same city under attack. Darkness poured from tiers in space itself, consuming everything it touched. The humans fought with powers that turned stars into weapons, but they were losing. Marcus watched in horror as civilization after civilization fell to an enemy that seemed to be made of living entropy. "They were also arrogant," the Cathara said sadly. "They believed their power made them invincible. They delved too deep into forces they didn't fully understand, and they awakened something that should have remained sleeping. The Devourers came, and the great empire fell." The scene faded, leaving Marcus standing once again in the shifting chamber. The weight of what he had witnessed settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. "Now you understand the true test," the Cathara said. "It is not enough to possess power. One must possess the wisdom to use it responsibly. The dragons have awakened because the galaxy faces new threats, cosmic forces that require the return of the Starshapers to combat. But if humanity repeats the mistakes of the past, the Devourers could return," Marcus finished, understanding flooding through him. "Precisely. So we must determine, are you ready to bear this responsibility? Can you guide your species back to its cosmic role without leading it to destruction?" What followed was unlike any test Marcus could have imagined. The Cathara didn't simply evaluate his knowledge or his power. They probed his very soul, examining his motivations, his fears, his capacity for sacrifice. They showed him scenarios where he might have to choose between saving individual lives and preserving the greater good. They tested his resolve by offering him easy paths to power that would require compromising his principles. For hours that felt like years, Marcus endured trials that pushed him beyond his limits. He faced holographic recreations of the ancient Devourers, learning to channel the dragon-touched power within him to combat entropy itself. He stood before simulated councils of alien races, learning to negotiate between species whose thought processes were utterly foreign to human understanding. But the hardest test was the most personal. The Cathara showed him a vision of Earth as it might be if he failed, consumed by the same darkness that had devoured Arcadia Prime, its people crying out for a savior who would never come. "You could prevent this," the Cathara whispered. "Accept our guidance. Let us shape you into what humanity needs. Surrender your individual will for the greater good of your species." For a moment, Marcus wavered. The temptation was enormous, to let these ancient beings guide his choices, to avoid the terrible responsibility of deciding the fate of entire worlds. But then, he remembered the dragon's first message, the knowledge they had shared about what it truly meant to be human. "No," he said firmly. "Humanity's strength has always been our independence, our refusal to bow to cosmic forces beyond our understanding. If I'm to lead my people back to their heritage, I have to do it as a human, not as your puppet." The Cathara stepped back, and for the first time, Marcus saw something like approval in its ancient eyes. "Spoken like a true heir of the Starshapers. Very well. You have passed our initial evaluation." "Initial?" Marcus asked, suddenly wary. "This was merely the first test," the Cathara explained. to determine if you possess the basic qualities necessary for leadership. The true trials lie ahead as you gather others like yourself and begin the work of rebuilding what was lost. We will be watching, and when the time comes, we will test you again. The chamber dissolved around them, and Marcus found himself back aboard the Prometheus. Through the viewports, he could see the Kythera fleet already beginning to fade from normal space, returning to whatever dimensional refuges they inhabited between their rare appearances. But the dragons remained, their crystalline forms now moving in complex patterns around the human vessel. Marcus felt their approval wash over him like sunlight, along with new knowledge, coordinates to other dragon nests throughout the galaxy, and more importantly, the locations of other awakening humans who would need guidance. "What happened?" Elena asked anxiously. "You've been gone for hours." "The first test," Marcus replied, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settling more firmly on his shoulders. "And now, the real work begins." Over the following months, the Prometheus became something unprecedented in human space, a vessel that could travel between dimensions, seeking out the scattered descendants of humanity's golden age. Marcus gathered them slowly, carefully, teaching each new awakened human to control abilities that defied conventional science. There was Sarah Kim from Wolf 359, who could manipulate gravitational fields with her thoughts. David Park from New Eden, whose touch could accelerate biological processes to incredible speeds. Maria Lopez from the Tau Ceti colonies, who had learned to commune directly with artificial intelligences. Each new addition to their group brought fresh perspectives and abilities, but also new challenges. These individuals were often confused and frightened by their emerging powers, and Marcus had to serve as both teacher and protector. He began to understand why the ancient human empire had developed such rigid hierarchies. Managing beings of cosmic power required leadership skills that went far beyond normal human experience. The dragons approved of his choices, providing knowledge and resources that helped the growing group adapt to their roles. But Marcus knew they were still being watched, still being tested. The Kythera might approve of his initial choices, but greater trials lay ahead. As the Prometheus continued its journey between the stars, collecting the scattered seeds of humanity's rebirth, Marcus often found himself thinking about the visions he had seen of the ancient empire's fall. The power they were reclaiming was magnificent, but it came with terrible risks. One wrong choice, one moment of arrogance, and they could unleash forces that would make the original devourers seem like a minor inconvenience. The young man who had spoken with dragons was becoming something larger than human, but he was determined to retain his humanity in the process. The galaxy had waited 50,000 years for humanity to reclaim its birthright. Marcus was going to make sure they were worthy of it this time. 15 years after the first dragon awakening, Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the Constellation, humanity's first true starship capable of interdimensional travel. At 34, he commanded respect that transcended species boundaries. His once dark hair now held streaks of silver that seemed to capture starlight, and his eyes glowed with an inner fire that marked him as something beyond ordinary human experience. Around him, the gathered fleet of humanity's awakened children prepared for what might be their final battle. 200 vessels strong, each one bonded with dragon-forged technology, crewed by humans who had learned to bend reality to their will. They represented the rebirth of humanity's cosmic empire, but they faced a threat that had already consumed 17 star systems. The Devourers had returned. "Admiral Chen," came the voice of Captain Sarah Kim, now commanding her own dragon-bonded dreadnought, the Graviton Fury. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive spatial distortions in the Vega system. They're bigger than anything we've seen before." Marcus nodded grimly. Over the past 3 years, Humanity had watched helplessly as the ancient enemy of their forebears emerged from whatever cosmic prison had held them for 50 millennia. The Devourers weren't just destroyers, they were entropy made manifest, creatures that fed on the fundamental forces that held reality together. "How long until they reach inhabited space?" Marcus asked. "At their current rate of consumption, 6 hours," replied Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the fleet's chief science officer. Her research had been instrumental in developing weapons that could actually harm the Devourers, though stopping them entirely remained beyond human capability. "Sir," interrupted a new voice, "Lieutenant Chen Wei, one of the youngest awakened humans at barely 18. The Kithara are requesting to speak with you." Marcus turned toward the main viewer as it shimmered to life, revealing the ethereal form of High Arbiter Veltar, the Kithara leader who had tested him years ago. The ancient being's expression was grave. "Herald of the Star Shapers," Veltar began, using the formal title the Kithara had granted Marcus. "The time of final testing has arrived. The Devourers move toward the core worlds with purpose. They seek not random destruction, but something specific." "What?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "You, Marcus Chen, and through you, the rebirth of humanity's cosmic power. They remember the taste of Starshaper energy from their last feeding. They hunger for it again." The implications struck Marcus like a physical blow. The enemy wasn't just randomly consuming star systems. They were following a trail that led directly to him and the other awakened humans. Every world they had visited, every person they had awakened to their true heritage, had left traces that the Devourers could follow. "Then we end this here," Marcus declared. "We make our stand and settle this once and for all." "You understand what you're risking?" Veltar asked. "If you fail, if the Devourers consume your essence as they did your ancestors, there will be no second chance for humanity. The potential for cosmic awakening will die with you." Marcus looked around his bridge at the faces of his companions. Sarah Kim, who had learned to create gravitational anomalies that could tear ships apart or hold dying stars together. David Park, whose mastery of biological acceleration had allowed them to terraform dead worlds in months instead of centuries. Maria Lopez, who had become humanity's first true AI whisperer, capable of communicating with machine intelligences across the galaxy. These were his people, the inheritors of humanity's forgotten glory. They had come so far from the scattered colonial refugees they had once been. But more than that, they had become something new, not just recreations of the ancient star shapers, but an evolution beyond what humanity had been before its fall. "We're not our ancestors," Marcus said firmly. "We've learned from their mistakes. We won't repeat them." Veltar's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps. The dragons believe so, or they would not have awakened for you. Very well. We offer what aid we can, though our weapons are poorly suited to battle such foes." As the Kithara transmission ended, Marcus felt the familiar touch of draconic consciousness reaching across space toward him. The great guardians were stirring, emerging from their hidden sanctuaries throughout the galaxy. For the first time in 50,000 years, the ancient servants of humanity were preparing for war. "Fleet Command," Marcus announced over the General Communications channel. "All ships, prepare for interdimensional transit. We're taking the fight to the Devourers before they can reach inhabited space." What followed was the largest coordinated jump in human history. 200 dragon-bonded vessels, along with uncounted Kithara support ships, and something that defied description. The dragons themselves, no longer hiding their true forms as they soared through the void like crystalline whales swimming through an ocean of stars. They emerged in the Vega system to find a sight that challenged sanity. The Devourers had consumed 4 of the system's planets entirely, leaving behind not empty space but wounds in reality itself, zones where the fundamental laws of physics simply ceased to function. At the center of this cosmic devastation floated the Devourer fleet, if such a term could even apply to beings made of crystallized entropy. "My God," whispered Elena Vasquez, "they're beautiful." She was right, in a terrible way. The Devourers were creatures of dark magnificence, their forms shifting between dimensions as they fed on the collapsed matter of destroyed worlds. They looked like living black holes wrapped in geometric perfection, their surfaces reflecting distorted images of space and time. "All ships," Marcus commanded, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. "Engage at maximum range. Dragon Wings, begin your approach." Today we discover if humanity is truly ready to reclaim its place among the stars. The battle that followed would be remembered as the Second War of Cosmic Scale, though few would survive to record its details. Human weapons, enhanced with dragon-forged materials and channeled through awakened human will, struck out at targets that existed partially outside normal space-time. The Devourers responded with attacks that unraveled the very structure of reality, creating zones where cause and effect operated in reverse and matter spontaneously converted to pure chaos. Marcus stood at the center of it all, his consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his physical body. Through his bond with the dragons, he could perceive the battle across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. He saw Sarah Kim's ship carving gravitational wounds in space that trapped Devourer assault forms. He witnessed David Park accelerating the fusion processes within nearby stars, turning them into weapons that burned with purifying fire. But he also saw the price. Ships were dying, their crews consumed by entropy fields that aged them to dust in seconds. Entire sections of space were becoming uninhabitable as the fundamental forces that governed matter were devoured and digested. "We can't win this way," Maria Lopez's voice crackled across the communication channels. "They're too spread out, too numerous. For every one we destroy, 3 more emerge from the dimensional rifts." Marcus knew she was right. The conventional battle was going poorly, despite their enhanced weapons and draconic allies. The Devourers had learned from their ancient victory over humanity's first empire. They had adapted, evolved, become something that could not be defeated by simple force of arms. But Marcus had learned something, too, in his years of gathering and training the awakened humans. The old empire had fallen because of arrogance, because the Star Shapers had believed their individual power made them invincible. They had fought as gods among mortals, each one a cosmic force unto themselves. That wasn't humanity's true strength. "All awakened personnel," Marcus broadcast on the telepathic frequencies that dragon bonding made possible. "Link with me, now." Across the battle zone, 200 minds touched Marcus's consciousness and joined with it. Sarah Kim's gravitational mastery merged with David Park's biological acceleration. Maria Lopez's machine empathy combined with the technological manipulation abilities of dozens of others. Engineers who could reshape matter at the atomic level linked with navigators who could perceive the currents of space-time itself. What emerged from their union was something unprecedented in galactic history. Not a single overwhelming consciousness, but a collective intelligence that retained each individual's unique perspective while amplifying their combined abilities exponentially. They became something greater than the sum of their parts, a network of awakened human minds backed by the ancient power of the dragons. The Devourers paused in their assault, sensing that something fundamental had changed in their opposition. For the first time since entering the system, they showed what might have been uncertainty. Marcus, now speaking for the collective consciousness of humanity's awakened children, addressed the ancient enemy directly. His words reached across dimensional barriers, carried by will and power that made the fabric of space itself tremble. "You remember our ancestors," he said, his voice echoing across multiple planes of existence simultaneously. "You remember how they tasted, how their individual power fed your hunger, but we are not them." To demonstrate, the linked consciousness reached out and grasped one of the dimensional rifts the Devourers had torn in space. Instead of trying to seal it through brute force, they transformed it, using their combined understanding of physics and metaphysics to convert the wound in reality into a stabilized portal. Through that portal came something the Devourers had never faced before, the combined will of a species that had learned to work in perfect harmony while maintaining individual identity. The attack that followed wasn't just an assault of energy and matter, but a fundamental restructuring of the local laws of physics themselves. The awakened humans weren't just fighting the Devourers, they were rewriting the rules of engagement entirely. Space began to sing with frequencies that had no name as the collective human consciousness imposed new patterns on the quantum foam that underlied reality. Where the Devourers brought entropy and dissolution, humanity brought complexity and creation. Matter that had been reduced to primordial chaos began to reorganize itself into increasingly sophisticated forms. The destroyed planets of the Vega system started to reform, not as they had been, but as something new and wonderful. Worlds where the boundary between matter and energy was so fluid that continents could be reshaped by conscious will, where the inhabitants would be as much creators as inhabitants. "Impossible," came a voice that spoke in harmonics of cosmic discord, the first time any human had ever heard a Devourer communicate directly. "This pattern is unknown. This unity in diversity was not present in the previous Star Shapers." Marcus smiled, feeling the approval of 200 minds linked with his own. "Because we learned from their failure. They sought to become gods. We chose to remain human." What followed was less a battle than a fundamental argument about the nature of reality itself. The Devourers represented the universe's tendency toward entropy, toward the dissolution of complex systems into simpler ones. They had evolved to accelerate that process, feeding on the energy released when organized matter returned to chaos. But humanity represented something else entirely, the universe's capacity for growth, for the emergence of ever greater complexity from simpler components. They had always been builders, creators, shapers of possibility. Even at their lowest point, scattered across a handful of colonial worlds, they had continued to dream of something greater. Now, linked in perfect cooperation while maintaining their individual identities, they had become the living embodiment of that creative force. The confrontation lasted for hours that felt like centuries. Reality itself groaned under the strain as two fundamental aspects of cosmic existence wrestled for supremacy. Stars flickered and reformed, space twisted into impossible geometries before snapping back to familiar patterns. In the end, the Devourers faced a choice they had never encountered before. For 50,000 years, they had existed as the ultimate predators, feeding on civilizations that eventually succumbed to their own limitations. But humanity's awakened children offered something different, not conquest, but transformation. "You could become more than consumers," Marcus offered, his words carrying the weight of the entire linked consciousness behind them. "Join us in creation, instead of feeding on destruction." The pause that followed seemed to stretch across geological ages. Then, slowly, the Devourer fleet began to change. Their forms of crystallized entropy started to incorporate new patterns, structures that resembled the dragon-forged technologies that humanity had mastered. They were evolving, transforming from pure destroyers into something that could build as well as consume. It was a change that violated everything the galaxy thought it knew about the ancient enemy, but it was happening nonetheless. This outcome was not foreseen, admitted High Arbiter Veltar, his transmission reaching the human fleet from his distant observation point. In all our calculations, in all the scenarios we modeled, we never anticipated the Devourers themselves could be recruited. Marcus felt the linked consciousness beginning to separate as the immediate crisis passed. 200 individual minds pulled back from their merger, each carrying with them memories of perfect unity and the knowledge that they could achieve it again when necessary. "That's the difference between us and our ancestors," he replied to the Cathara leader. "They saw enemies to be defeated. We see potential allies to be understood." The aftermath of the Second War of Cosmic Scale reshaped galactic civilization in ways that would echo for millennia. Humanity, no longer the struggling survivors of a fallen empire, took their place as mediators between the galaxy's great powers. The dragons, no longer hidden guardians waiting for their master's return, emerged openly to assist in the work of cosmic construction. Even the Devourers, transformed by their contact with human creativity, became partners in reshaping dead worlds into gardens of impossible beauty. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The young man who had spoken with dragons, who had been tested by ancient judges, had become something beyond individual identity. He was now the living symbol of humanity's potential, the bridge between what they had been and what they could become. Standing on the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching as transformed Devourers worked alongside human engineers to build structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. He had been born during a storm on a dying mining colony, marked from birth as something different. He had grown up learning to speak with ancient guardians who remembered when humanity ruled the stars. He had been tested by cosmic judges who questioned whether his species deserved a second chance at greatness. Now, watching former enemies work together to create wonders that surpassed anything the old empire had achieved, Marcus knew the answer to that question. Humanity had not just reclaimed its birthright, it had evolved beyond what it had ever been before. They had learned the most important lesson the galaxy had to offer. True power came not from dominion over others, but from the ability to transform enemies into allies, to find common ground even with forces that seemed completely opposed to everything you represented. The child who had spoken with dragons had become the myth he was destined to be, not through conquest or the accumulation of personal power, but through the understanding that humanity's greatest strength had always been their ability to bring out the best in others, even in the most unlikely places. As the binary stars of Centauri set over Harmony Station, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus Chen, Admiral, Herald, and living symbol of humanity's rebirth, smiled at the knowledge that the greatest adventures were still ahead. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and challenges that would require all of humanity's creativity and compassion to address. But they were ready. They had proven themselves worthy of their cosmic inheritance, not through the accumulation of power, but through the wisdom to use that power in service of something greater than themselves. The myth had been realized, and it was more beautiful than anyone had dared to imagine.